Welcome back, guys. This is Rob of Rule 2 Review, and today, Capcom is up for sale, but who's buying? Let's go. All right, like I said, welcome back, everybody. First, before I move on to the topic at hand today, I do have to give a quick amendment to my most recent video, yesterday's video about Little Big Planet 3. I actually, like I said, need to make an amendment. I made a mistake when discussing Media Molecule being the developer of the game, because apparently that is not the case. I was corrected by someone in the comment section who had let me see, it was The Guy With No Nickname Productions. That is the name of the person, the gentleman, I guess, who made this statement and pointed this out to me. So The Guy With No Nickname did correctly presume that it is not Media Molecule that is working on Little Big Planet 3. It is actually Sumo Digital. That was complete news to me. I have no idea how that information had eluded me. I went back and researched and double-checked to make sure that that was true, and that is indeed true. Media Molecule is nowhere near the game, which is kind of weird and actually sort of depressing, because I thought they did such a great job with 1 and 2, but it seems like this other team is going to be taking over the next game or the franchise for the future or what have you, starting with Little Big Planet 3. Since they're probably building on all the same assets and everything that created the first 2 games, I'm sure it's going to be just as good. Hopefully, if they're as creative as Media Molecule was, I'm sure it's going to still turn out pretty awesome. But yeah, I have to definitely apologize for not being able to get that correct and give one more shout out to The Guy With No Nickname Productions. Thanks. Good on you, buddy. I appreciate you pointing out that I made that glaring mistake. And so, yep, that's all that good stuff for my apologies and my shame today. So now let's move on to Capcom. Okay, so this is pretty interesting and rather huge news that has come out in the last day. You're probably familiar with this as always, but just in case you're not, it turns out that Capcom has now made itself available for a whole company buyout, aka a hostile takeover, for the first time since 2008. Now, the details I've been able to learn about how this whole thing has played out is basically this. In 2008, Capcom had put in place for itself a legal structure that would not allow for any other one company or entity to purchase more than 50% of its shares in the stock trading. Now, in purchasing more than 50% of any one company's shares on the stock market, shares on the stock market, if a company were to do that, you basically you own that company. You have the majority of stake in that company. You are in control. You're making the decisions. You're determining its business model, its structure, laying off people, firing, hiring new people, doing whatever it is that you want, basically. It essentially gives you ownership of that company. That one entity then becomes your entity. So now I don't know the particulars of this, but I've gleaned this from a couple of different sites and some YouTube channels, and including IGN, that they did have something in place that they put in place in 2008 to prevent that from being possible. Meaning it was going to remain its own entity and Capcom was going to be in control of itself for the time being. Now, it recently had the ability to renew or re-up that structure, that status, and it has apparently opted out of doing so, which means it has now willingly made itself available to be purchased, to have someone purchase more than 50%, if not all of the shares, all of the stake in that company, and then effectively own Capcom. This is pretty big news. Capcom is one of the oldest third-party developers in the business. I myself grew up in the 80s gaming with the Atari 2600 and 8-bit days of gaming. And I remember when Capcom was as prolific as possible. And through the 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, Capcom was just amazing. They were like the gold seal of quality. And when you look at all of the different IPs and franchises they have, it's ridiculous. Resident Evil, Street Fighter, Dead Rising, Monster Hunter. What's the other big one that I just was about to say? And did I say Mega Man? Anyway, all of there's plenty of them. There's some other obvious ones that I'm totally brain farting, but I mean, those in and of themselves are amazing. Like, and that is kind of why the company should be worth more and should have been in better position these last couple of years than they have been. But, it's been pretty well documented that they've been making some mistakes, have been drowning in their problems and not making a lot of money and turning a profit. So we know that they've been getting to the point where, some people claim to have been able to see this coming. I sort of did. I've made a couple of videos discussing Capcom's, present situation and some of their financial woes and stuff over the last couple of months. And it's been really interesting to see it play out. And now, of course, comes the revelation that all of a sudden they could be purchased. And so therein lies the big question and the topic that everyone has been talking about regarding Capcom the last day since this news came out. And that is who would buy them, who is going to buy them, who would buy them, who should buy them. That's a pretty big question. Now, there's a very, very common answer and a company that a lot of people have thrown about. And I am not going to pull any punches. I'm going to straight up admit I'm pretty much in the same boat. I'm not going to try to be unique in this respect. I absolutely think it would be wonderful if Nintendo were to purchase Capcom. It's very nice and reassuring to see a lot of other people across the web basically saying the same thing. Everyone seems to recognize and realize that that partnership would be beautiful. Nintendo would get a lot of help in the third-party department. Capcom would get saved by a very wealthy company because Nintendo more than has enough money to be able to afford Capcom. I myself, even though I'm an equal opportunity gamer and a fan of all the different consoles and handhelds and everyone out there making stuff, Nintendo is my favorite. I have to reiterate that every time Nintendo comes up on a video for anyone who hasn't known that or might be new to the channel. Nintendo is my first and foremost. They're my go-to. I love those guys, and I'm really excited. It's a great time to be a Nintendo fan because their E3 was so strong, and it looks like their next couple of years are set up to be really fantastic. So as a Nintendo fan, the idea of them securing a company like Capcom and all of those amazing and legendary IPs is just music to my ears. I mean, I would love for that to happen. It would be very, very smart for Nintendo. Again, you know, reiterating some of what Capcom has, Resident Evil, Street Fighter, Mega Man, Dead Rising, and Monster Hunter. Oh my God, those 5 franchises alone would be huge for Nintendo, especially because 4 out of the 5 are relatively mature, you know, especially Dead Rising and Resident Evil. Those are really, really mature franchises. So those are the kinds of things that are also being third party can really, really help Nintendo, because that's kind of one of the areas that we know they've been struggling with the last couple of years, and honestly, a couple of console cycles and generations too. So now it's weird too, because there's actually a history of this. During the GameCube era, Nintendo had struck a deal with Capcom for a period. Some of you may or may not remember this or even be old enough to remember this, but they had struck a deal to have what was known as the Capcom 5, which was 5 exclusive Capcom games for the GameCube. And that was building off of, for that generation, Resident Evil was actually exclusive to the GameCube once the GameCube had come out. The PS2 did have a version of Code Veronica in its first year before the GameCube had launched, but once the GameCube launched, Nintendo was able to secure that. So they got Resident Evil, the remake of the original, Resident Evils 2 and 3 and Code Veronica, and then of course the notorious Resident Evil 4, the masterpiece itself. And Resident Evil 4 was the first of the Capcom 5, which included Resident Evil 4, Killer 7, Product number 3, otherwise known as PNO3, which I actually own that game, as well as actually the first 2. And that was a good game. And then Beautiful Joe. So those 4 games were part of the Capcom 5. They did all release. A couple of years later, Resident Evil 4, Beautiful Joe, and Killer 7 did get a PS2 release, but they were exclusive to the GameCube for at least a year and a half or so. So that still counted. Product number 3 never went anywhere. It wasn't a big success. I actually really, really like that game. It's kind of like an arcade shooter with like a really hot girl in a futuristic space setting, like Fifth Element. It's cool for what it is. It's simple but cool. There was a 5th game called Dead Phoenix, which never ever released and never saw the light of day. I saw maybe 5 or 6 screenshots in my lifetime through going through Game Informer at the time when I was still managing a GameStop. And like they were very, very hard to make out, and that was it. So we never heard of them again. So, you know, building off of that idea, it's just funny to think that, you know, 2 generations ago, and this would probably be 11 or 12 years ago, Nintendo did, for a period, have an exclusive thing going on with Capcom. And even further so, that's kind of going on today, because right now Nintendo seems to have an exclusive license with Capcom for Monster Hunter, because the last 3 Monster Hunter games, or the last 2 and the upcoming Monster Hunter game, have all been exclusive to Nintendo platforms. That was the 2 versions of Monster Hunter 3, as well as even the 3DS versions. That's a 3rd one. And then, of course, the upcoming Monster Hunter 4. So those have all been exclusive to Nintendo, and you got to think that that's going to continue. We also, of course, have Mega Man appearing in Smash Brothers. So it's really kind of an interesting time and an interesting thing when you weigh all the different details and what's going on to imagine if that would be possible. You know, I think that Nintendo's probably thinking about it. Capcom's probably thinking the same thing. There are probably other companies out there, of course, that might also be considering wanting to, you know, own Capcom, because if the right company with a lot of money and support gets behind those IPs that Capcom has licensed to, that they own, then someone is going to be knocking it out of the park. I want it to be Nintendo. I think that they could do the best with it. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's plenty of other capable studios and developers and console manufacturers. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I don't think Sony has enough money to spend to really own it, but I do think that Microsoft and Nintendo are really good bets as far as how much money. Sony may gamble and spend the money. They would be taking a really big hit early on because the company as itself is drowning, but they might be willing to invest that to own it. Nintendo has a lot of extra money. They could easily afford it. Same with Microsoft. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what's going to happen, you know? So like I said, I want Nintendo to purchase Capcom. I think that it's a possibility. Do I really think it's going to happen? I'm very doubtful, sadly. It almost seems too good to be true. And so many people want it so much and so badly that it's almost like there's just no way it's going to happen because we want it to happen so badly, you know? It'll be interesting to see if Capcom themselves maybe reach out to anybody, which wouldn't really make it a hostile takeover if someone really did purchase all these shares. If Capcom reaches out to Nintendo or Microsoft or somebody and says, hey, we want to be a part of you. Will you purchase us? Basically, you know, we're selling ourselves to you. That would be like a voluntary takeover, I guess. That's a term that I just coined there, so you all can have that. A voluntary takeover where they say, please own us, please buy us, let's work together. Do I see Nintendo going out of their way to do it? Very, very unlikely. Not impossible. So I will, you know, retain that one positive spin before I end the video here. I do think it's certainly possible, and they're probably looking at it, and they obviously do have a good and have had a good relationship with Capcom in the past, including currently. But I just think it's too awesome to be. We're probably not going to see it. So, you know, that's pretty much it. We're just going to have to see what happens and what decisions Capcom's another company makes down the road. Maybe we do get lucky and Nintendo decides to pick them up, you know? I mean, I just don't want their franchises to go away. I hope Nintendo buys them, but if not, I just hope that whatever happens, Capcom remains okay, and their beloved franchises that we all love and enjoy don't go away, and that those are also okay. And so that's pretty much that for Capcom. Hopefully Nintendo buys them. If not, you know, hopefully someone else does and the right things happen for their amazing franchises. So that is pretty much it. That's the video for today. So thanks for tuning in. Of course, if you like the channel, what I'm doing, you can like Rule of Two Review, subscribe, like and share the video. You can share your comments and your thoughts below. And thanks for tuning in. I will, of course, catch you next time.